Okay, this is Will here. Today we have a game that Andrew and I played between the Unkar's Misfits deck and Andrew's new Han Rey. So this is our mulligans. So Andrew decides to keep his holdout blaster, of course, for Rey's action cheating, and an infamous, in case he draws a hunker down or Maz's goggles to allow more action cheating. I end up only keeping the disarm because I know he's going for holdout blasters early, and I mulligan the rest because there's a lot of control cards in my deck and I know I can get some of them back on the mulligan. So these are two interesting decks because Unkar's Misfits plays an extremely slow game while Han Rey plays the extremely fast game, cheating actions every turn and trying to deal 3 with Han or gain a lot of resources to play DL44s and holdout blasters, increasing their damage output. Another key to this matchup is the battlefield. I would much rather play on my battlefield, and Andrew would much rather play on his battlefield. Not only does Starship Graveyard allow him to loop the holdout blasters into multiple cheat actions off of Rey, but it also prevents me from milling him in the endgame, allowing him to put a card on top of his deck every turn, preventing me from killing him that way. So Andrew decides not to play the holdout blaster here because he's afraid of Imperial Inspection. But we talked about it after the game, and I think he may have wanted to here. It would have been a burden on his resources and could have swayed the game in my favor, but as you'll see, Andrew ends up gaining a lot of resources here. So I think he did, in the end, make the right decision. Unfortunately for Andrew, he didn't roll a bunch of damage, but those resources will really come in handy as the game goes forward. So I'm just continuing to play slow here. I want to react to whatever Andrew does. If he rerolls, I want to be able to use my control cards to remove his dice. If he just takes resources, I'll have free reign to roll in Unkar and the TIE Pilot and possibly get some cards out of his hand. I also really want to use that loose ends this turn with my TIE Pilot, so I'm going to attempt that right here. And I did hit the damage side, the range damage side. But Andrew hits the disrupt here, which forces my hand with the loose ends, as I don't want to lose 2 resources for no gain on my part. And Andrew didn't reroll his Rey and Han dice because resources early is really big for the Han Rey deck. It never hurts to be sitting on 4 or 6 resources on a turn. They've got reversals, DL44s, they always want to be playing upgrades, playing Comlink. So here's an interesting play that I think may be overlooked is my Imperial Inspections don't hit anything here, so I was able to hit Disrupt and bounce my own Hunker down, allowing me to replay it and place another shield on Unkar. Or replay it on the Royal Guard, I think I do. We realized at some point that I hadn't taken 2 shields at the beginning of the game, but it was a little bit too late. We were messing with the camera and overlooked it, so I was playing this game on hard mode. So as you can see, Andrew's actually got a great hand against me. Even though I took that holdout blaster out of his hand, he's going to put it on the top of his deck with Starship Graveyard. But the two Loth Cat and Mouses both cause a 0, completely preventing me from getting any resources with Unkar later in the game. You already saw Han disrupt 2 of my resources there that I got with taking the holdout blaster using Unkar's ability. Keeping 0-cost cards in your hand definitely helps against Unkar. So here I play the Hunker Down again and get another shield, which I wish I would have had 5 shields at this point, but what can you do? So my hand's set up pretty nicely. I've got the I've got the disarm and a flank. And then now I'm set up with my mid to late game cards, the interrogation droid and the blackmail, which I really want to put down as fast as possible and start putting the pressure on Andrew with it, on his resources and on his deck and on his hand. You can see Andrew has a guard, robes, and the holdout blaster that he just put on top. So now he's going to be able to action cheat almost every turn with 2 holdout blasters, one in his discard pile and one on Rey right now. So he rolls Han and again disrupts my resources, putting me in a tight spot as now that's 4 resources that Han has taken. Right there, I took the damage with the Royal Guard because I didn't want him to roll holdout blaster, possibly with a cheat if he infamouses a Hunker Down or something, and hits the +2 on holdout blaster, or even the pay 2. That would be a 4 damage swing out of nowhere without me able to respond. So I was trying to mitigate that as much as possible. Unfortunately for me, he rolled a melee and a range here, so I have to use my Hunker Down to at least save 1 damage, and it's the range, of course, because he wants to use the melee damage to remove my Hunker Down, and I have no usable removal, only the Feel Your Anger at this point. So I cut my losses and just roll Unkar in. Didn't hit the disrupt to bounce the holdout blaster. Not sure if I would at that point, giving him even more access to cheat actions. I want to force him to put his holdout on every turn and only get 1 cheat action. So Andrew gets the Hunker Down. Here I decide to try and use Unkar's ability, hoping I can play my blackmail or my interrogation droid. But unfortunately I hit the Loth Cat and Mouse there for 0 resources. And Andrew continues to build resources, which is a very strange situation for these 2 decks, as my deck is usually the one that has all the resources and puts pressure on him, but Han has that 2 disrupt side. So Andrew plays his Jedi robes here on Han to get another shield, and that really sets him up for a riposte coming up. I mean, he's got 2 of them in the deck, so he's always trying to set up as many shields on his characters as possible for a quick burst. I take another card with TIE Pilot, but unfortunately it's the other Loth Cat and Mouse, and again 0 resources, which puts me in a awkward situation where I've got my full hand but can't play anything. Andrew claims and puts his holdout on top. And while I did do a bit of damage to his hand there, I didn't progress my board state any, which has got me in a difficult spot. Luckily Andrew hasn't rolled too much damage yet, and Guard has only taken 2 damage beyond his shields. So Andrew decides to replace Holdout Blaster with Holdout Blaster there because he wants to continue the recursion every turn and be able to cheat as much as he can. Because he knows my deck plays a lot of removal. So Andrew gets the 3-for-1 on Han and hits the guard. The reason he doesn't go for Unkar is that if you start splitting your damage between Unkar and the guard, I'll get even more rolls with the guard to hit maybe his 2 and really pushes me forward on using Unkar's ability to its fullest. But once guard is out of the way, then he can focus down on either Unkar or the TIE pilot. So I hit the disrupt here with my Unkar, and the reason I bounce the robes is that I want to make him pay as much as possible and try and whittle down these 4 resources that he has. Andrew has the riposte here to kill off the guard. Really devastating for me because now I've got no protection for Unkar. And I'm just going to have to survive on my removal events and armor plating along with hunker downs. So I'm trying to hit the 2+ or higher on the TIE pilot here to be able to disarm that Holdout Blaster and force him to start paying more resources. So he does play robes there on Rey. Again, starting to build up these shields for his second riposte, which I know is coming. It was fortunate for me there that he rolls 2 blanks. I was hoping he rolled at least 1 to feel your anger. So again, I've prevented some of the damage from building up, but I haven't progressed my board state at all, and I've lost my Royal Guard this turn. So now I'm going to have to try to get resources the hard way. So now Andrew has claimed with her Holdout Blaster. And now I've got free reign to try and hit the rest of his hand with the interrogation droid and some rerolls. You can see he's got those 2 guards there, which don't help him too much against my deck because guard will not only remove his damage dice, but remove a card from his hand, which progresses my game plan. Right here, I forgot for a second that Interrogation Droid had an ability, but I quickly stop and check his hand. And I'm still going to reroll my other 2 dice. That's one of the most important things about what makes Interrogation Droid so good is that you don't have to waste an extra action activating the dice if it does hit an event in the other player's hand. So at this point, I just cut my losses and I focused the 2 disrupt to cut him down to 0 resources. And finally, I've got him down to just his basic 2 resources per turn. But again, still haven't been able to play that blackmail that's been sitting in my hand. I did get the interrogation droid out, so that progressed my board state a little bit. So now Andrew has gone a little bit deeper into his deck, and now he's got DL44, Holdout Blaster, and Comlink. So a lot of action cheats are coming, and the Hunker Down with Infamous. If Andrew can hit damage here on these cheat rolls, I'm in a little bit of trouble. Unfortunately here, Andrew missed. Han has been rolling a little bit bad this game. Except for that first turn, he hasn't done much damage. So Andrew plays the Comlink on Rey to get the free reroll on Han, and still misses on damage. He's been pumping up resources, which is good for the deck, but at this point he really needs to be getting a lot of damage through. So at this point I see him put a shield on Rey, which makes me worry about riposte. But I know Andrew wants to use that event for 3 damage, so I don't use my friends in low places, and I rather try to hit it with the interrogation droid if he does have riposte. But we see the DL44, which Andrew promptly uses over Holdout Blaster or Comlink here to get another free action with Rey. And now that's a lot of damage that could be coming out of Rey here. So he does hit some of the pluses, but doesn't get any base damage yet. And with only 2 cards left in his hand, he's in a little bit of a difficult spot. Andrew overwrites Holdout Blaster with Holdout Blaster to get 2 more actions. Trying to hit this extra damage. And also has gotten up to 3 shields on Han, threatening a riposte. So Andrew discards to reroll. But again, does not hit the damage sides on Han. He has 1 more action, so he decides to take 2 resources there. Staying well ahead of me in the resource department, but not able to push through any damage here. So at this point, I'm actually trying to play towards a disarm of his DL44. Again, I'm always trying to keep him low on resources and pressure his economy. The loop is almost inevitable when he's got Starship Graveyard. So Andrew is passing here. He really has nothing to interact with me and is going to claim as soon as he knows that my turn is basically over. So I focus to the 3 and disarm his DL44, which is a big turning point in the game because that's a lot of damage that can come off of DL44, especially with Han's dice in play and on all the cheat actions that Andrew has been getting. So Andrew's got 11 cards left in his deck and none in his hand. So basically I'm just playing for the endgame now, trying to force through as many cards as I can. And I just pass, not wanting to play the armor plating because I was attempting to get my blackmail out and to close out the game. So another possible turning point in this game was Andrew passed on the opportunity to riposte here for 3 damage as his first action. Instead, favoring the action sheet, rolling of Han to try and push through some damage, but again hits the disrupt and disrupts me before I take my first action. But at this point, I know he's only got 6 cards left in deck, so he's probably got the other riposte in his hand. But even if I miss with my first friends in low places here, I was checking for the other riposte. Even if I miss with this friends in low places, I've got another one in my deck coming up, so I know I can still hit that riposte if it's not in this hand. I got a little bit lucky here, and it was in his hand. But I still have to beware of that reversal, because if I roll my TIE pilot out and it hits the 3, it can easily be a 3 damage swing right onto Ankar, or back at the TIE pilot, almost halving his health. So Andrew again cheats out with the infamous On Maz's Goggles, which we found to be an amazing card in Han Rey. If you haven't tried it yet, it really, those 2 base resource sides really help Rey to pump up your economy. So Andrew decides to try and force through some damage here. He got the +2 and the +2 on Hold Up Blaster and the +2 on Rey, but I have the flank for the big 3, which was 5 damage, including the Hold Up Blaster. He still gets a 3 damage through on Rey, opting to go at Ankar here. There's good reason to do that. I've already played one of my loose ends. He really has to worry about no disintegrations, but it doesn't matter which characters I have. And if he gets rid of Ankar, he stops me from hitting his hand as hard. Plus, he's put me in a position where it's difficult for me to play blackmail on either character, because one cheat roll can almost kill both of them. So now I know that he has 2 events in his hand, so I roll my interrogation droid, hit that reversal. It wasn't useful this turn because he only had 1 resource, but it would have been dangerous in the future. So I'm really just going for resources here. Andrew passes, but I don't hit any resources. And at this point, Andrew has to reroll because I've got 3 values showing, and I can just use Ankar's ability to remove the card, the electroshock in his hand. So this whole time I was just thinking about bouncing with Imperial Inspection. Which I end up bouncing the Holdout Blaster because that gives me another target for Ankar's action. So Andrew needs to conserve as many cards as possible here. But he also needs to push through as much damage as possible. So he decides to use his resource and play Holdout Blaster, overwriting Maz's Goggles for 1. And once again trying to get a damage on Han, but unfortunately hits the 3 for 1 here. Now when he needs it the least. Just double checking what he's going to put on top of his deck. So I decide to reroll, since Andrew has no cards in hand, I decide to reroll to hit resources. So getting this blackmail out this turn is a real priority for me, but I still miss on resources. So I could focus to a resource on an Unkar and pay 1 for the armor plating. So Andrew passes, or Andrew claims. And he decides to put Maz's Goggles on top of the deck. It's good on Rey when he infamouses it, and then he can roll Rey and focus the Holdout Blaster and the DL44, and it only costs him 1 to drop into play. At this point, I know I have another blackmail in my deck. So I do get 1 resource, but not exactly how I wanted that turn to go. But still not in bad shape. He's got 7 cards in deck now after putting Maz's Goggles on top. So only 2 left after he draws his 5-card hand. You can see I've drawn my first no disintegrations there, which is only worth 1 card off the top of the deck. But also have my second interrogation droid, which will really put a stranglehold on his hand. Andrew, on the other hand, has his second DL44, which is extremely dangerous. A Rey rolling with 2 DL44s on an action sheet. I lead with Salvage Stand just to try and prevent him from doing too much. Getting a 3rd upgrade onto Rey. I know he's going to have Maz's Goggles, but I want to prevent Han from paying for his 3-for-1 as much as possible. So 2 DL44s roll better than Han for damage usually, which he does hit 5 here on Unkar, putting him to 6 damage total. And now he's still got Han's dice plus 2 damage on Rey, which puts me in a bit of a spot here. I don't want to use my Electroshock on Rey's 1 dice because it's not enough to kill Unkar. And I'm already short on resources, and I really want to play this second interrogation droid. So at this point, I just want to try and get as much out of Unkar as I can before he dies. And I end up hitting the resource, which will prevent his Han from hitting the 3-for-1. So what Andrew's thinking about here is whether he wants to overwrite the DL44 with Maz's Goggles, which he eventually decides to do. If he does hit the 2 damage on Han, he's almost certainly got my Unkar dead. Which he does hit the 3-for-1. So he has to take the resource, and then I'll have a chance to respond to the 3-for-1. And Andrew knows it's pretty likely that I've got a removal in my hand, but it's the only way he can really put pressure on me. So he has to take the resource here, just hoping that I don't have one of my removal events. But Unkar's still up against the wall at 8 damage. So even one action sheet on Han, dealing 2 damage, or on Rey, could kill Unkar without me having an action. So now this is a tricky part at the end of the game with Starship Graveyard. I have to save a card that removes the top card of his deck in no disintegrations or loose ends to be able to close out the game if he claims. Otherwise he's just going to claim every turn, and then before I get to do anything he'll claim again and put a card on the top of his deck. So now that I've got my second interrogation droid, I can really start to hit his hand. And he's going to get to the point where he has to loop claiming with Starship Graveyard until I discard the last card in his hand, and then claim again and put a card on the top of his deck. And just roll Han Rey until he hits base damage without any rerolls. Because as soon as he would get rid of the last card in his hand, I would just claim. So I've got him down to 3 cards now that he claims and puts Holdout Blaster on top. But I have the no disintegrations to take the card. So now we've got 2 cards in hand plus the claim. Alright, so I'm hoping to draw no disintegrations or loose ends here. Which, there's my no disintegration. And also Con Artist can get the top card of his deck if I can focus it to a special side. An interesting roll here where he hit 2 discard sides, which could potentially get both of my cards that remove the top card of his deck. Which would leave me vulnerable to the infinite recursion. So at this point I don't have any dice removal cards in my hand. He's got 5 damage showing, so with Unkar on 2 health left, I decided to play Armor Plating because I want him to be forced to use all 5 damage on Unkar. If he only is forced to use the 3 damage side, he can reroll into more range damage and potentially hit the TIE Pilot for 5, putting me dead to a reroll or a 2 focus on Maz's goggles, focusing Rey to 2 damage. So I had to prevent as much damage as possible. So Andrew finally kills Unkar here. But it's going to be tough for him to deal 7 damage at this point. He's going to need another turn to do it. So I really want to end the game right here. So at this point, if Andrew does manage to hit the no disintegrations, I'm in a lot of trouble. And he's going to get another turn. If Maz had hit a special, it would have been really difficult for me. Because he could have taken the no disintegrations out of my hand and then claimed. So they're both upgrades, so I couldn't really take them. Oh, I finally remembered to use my salvage stand on that turn. I should have used it when I first rolled the interrogation droid. And now I'm re-rolling to try and hit. All I need is a discard or a focus on the TIE pilot, and I end up hitting both. So I get the last card out of his hand. He claims to put a card on the top, but I've got the no disintegrations for the game. For Andrew, it was an odd game because he was missing damage, but hitting a lot of disrupt, which put my game back a lot. I was never able to play a blackmail that I had early, and I just had enough to play an interrogation droid at the beginning. So an interesting but close game. I would say the matchup favors Han Rey on Starship Graveyard, but I would say that the matchup favors Misfits on Oth Gunga. And it's a pretty close roll-off. The average dice roll is almost the same for both character combinations. So thanks for watching. We'll bring you another podcast soon and more deck techs and gameplay videos. Thanks for watching.